Hello and welcome to today's webinar as hosted by Hanapin Marketing. Today's topic is how to keep your company's PPC spend in check. So basically how to keep a handle on your money, know where it's going, what you're actually getting for it, because otherwise it usually kind of tends to be a bit of a red flag. So today we are joined by the one and only Jeffrey Allen, President Generalissimo here at Hanapin Marketing. Also a speaker at HeroConf 2014, and if you need to get in touch with him, you can find him. You can be one of thousands who follow him on Twitter at Jeff Allen UT. UT is at University of Texas, University of Tennessee.
We all know that's Utah.
Oh, okay.
The University of Utah.
Okay.
And thank you for that rather loud introduction, Eric Ewau Couch. Anyone wondering what the Ewau is, you can ask him later. Yes, it's affiliated to the Jersey Shore. It's an interesting story, so ask him about it. That other person you heard, Eric, he is a senior account manager here at Hanapin. He's responsible for training all our noobs up and getting them up to speed in PPC. Blogger on the site, speaking at HeroConf, SMX, all that kind of good stuff. And you can find him at eCouch11 on Twitter.
Yeah, eCouch 1 through 10 was already taken by the time I finally hit Twitter, so that's kind of when we had default there.
Womp womp.
Yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, Jeff is right. I have deep ties to the Jersey Shore, so. All right, so moving ahead, if you want to join in on the conversation on today's webinar, be sure to include the hashtag ThinkPPC in your Twitter tweets, or you can always use the webinar question box to send us questions, or you can always go directly at Jeff Allen UT for any of your most pressing PPC questions. He'll be happy to answer just about anything you send him.
Thanks, Eric.
My pleasure, Jeff. So our first live poll question, number one. So how long have you been in PPC? So you can answer again either with the hashtag ThinkPPC or through the webinar question box. So our answers here are A, less than 1 year, B, 1 to 3 years, C, 3 to 5, or D, 5+ years. I think in Jeff's case, we'd have to go all the way to E of 20+ years.
But not quite that far.
Oh,
14 years.
Okay. All right. Well, close enough. And in my case, so yeah, just a little bit of number B, or actually number B, letter B. Let's go with that.
You're good with letters.
Yeah. So our breakdown today, it looks like the majority come in at less than 1 year, quickly followed by 1 to 3 years. Though we do have some old hands here in the audience with 5+ years.
Yep, so this is really interesting for us. We'll make sure to tailor it a little bit more to introductory level. Usually we have a lot more people with 5+ years of experience, so we'll take that in mind when we're going through the webinar.
Absolutely.
And the next question we have for you guys all to answer either through the ThinkPPC hashtag or through the webinar interface is how do you manage your account? So I manage it myself. I'm part of a team that manages it. I outsource my account management, or I'm rethinking how my account is managed. And again, this will help us as we're talking through ways to manage budget and concerns that people may have regarding how much they're spending, help us answer those questions and have talk through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is all about being able to tailor what exactly we're going to be talking about to the people who are kind enough to attend today's webinar. So in terms of the breakdown, oh wow, so we have a definite trend showing up here.
60% of the people saying I manage it myself, so that's good insight for us. 35% a team that manages it, and only 5% I outsource it. So a lot of in-house people today, so we'll make sure to talk about it in that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jeff, you want to take it away? We're going to kick it right off into basically how to keep your company's PPC spend in check.
Yeah, so the first point that I want to make about budgets is really about how we set them. So a lot of times when budgets are passed to us in an agency or even internally, it's just a big block number. We want to spend $100,000 on Google or whatever the channels are. And what my recommendation is actually understanding how you want to dedicate that budget to the core part of the campaigns versus experimental. The core being the things you know that work. Usually they've been in the accounts for 6 months, a year, 5 years. Versus experimental things, which are really the ideas of how to expand the account, or maybe they're new betas, or maybe they're new features that have been launched, or something like that. And understanding how you want to allocate that. One, helps the account manager know how hard they should push for growth versus manage what's existing, but also tells you some really interesting insights into the business and the way it's managed. So a couple of options you can have is someone might be risk adverse. They might want to spend 90% of their budget on core terms, the things they know work really well, the tried and true stuff, and only 10% on experimental. This tells you about the business, that they're really worried about keeping the lights on more than they're worried about finding new ideas. So you should spend your time figuring out how to optimize versus find expansion opportunities. Another bucket you might have is someone who's risk tolerant. So these are people that spend 80% of their budget on their core and 20% on experimental. And experimental can be anything from new engines like Facebook or Twitter or something like that, to betas or remarketing for search or anything like that that maybe you haven't tried before. And again, what this tells you about the business is that perhaps they are looking for expansion ideas, not necessarily as much as they want to make sure they're keeping the lights on and doing the core things, but that they're open to new ideas. And then there's a whole other category, which I've seen range all over the place, but we could call it high growth. And the example I have here is 60% on core and 40% on experimental. But these are people that are really trying to find new ideas, new things, new ways to do things. Sometimes it's a really new account, so they don't have the luxury of having a large core base of things that they know will work really well. Sometimes there's unique things happening in the business. So maybe revenue is really important to them for whatever reason. Maybe they want to get acquired, or maybe they're going to acquire another business. So they want top line revenue, and they want you out there finding as many opportunities to drive that as possible. Or maybe they have new products that they're testing or something like that. So these numbers are just estimates, but they kind of put you into three different buckets of whether you want to really focus on the core, whether you're looking for new ideas, or whether you really need new ideas to expand the account.
Well, I think just kind of looking at the way this breaks down, it's sort of like the practical experience I've had in managing accounts. So for the risk-averse ones, as you said, that's kind of more focused on optimization. The risk-tolerant ones, I think it's where you can start like experimenting with some of the easier wins. Like that's, like you said, new engines, like maybe Bing or like a remarketing campaign. So things that are more risky than like a core Google search campaign or like a brand campaign, but allows for some growth. And then for high growth, as you said, for like when you're really wanting to blow the doors off with some new display campaigns, or just trying to get really inventive with some of the things that you're trying, like similar users or business affinity categories, whatever new things they're rolling out that aren't as proven as some of the things we know about.
Absolutely true. So the next thing that I would say is really you should do that core versus experimental budget, but either way you should understand the incremental lift from the new things you are doing, which means looking at new spend and new conversions, not just an aggregate of spend and conversions and how that affects CPA. So looking at top line, I spent $100,000, I generated this many conversions at this CPA, really hides good or bad spend. Meaning it might hide good spend, things that are working really, really well for you, but you don't understand that because you're looking at too high of a level. Or you might be doing new things that are working really poorly for you, but because it's a small percent of your spend, you ignore that $500 conversion when it normally costs $20 or whatever it is. Right. So looking at incremental spend and conversion allows you to decide if the extra sales or leads that you are getting are worth the higher CPA or return on ad spend or whatever metric you're using that they come with. Because usually there is a core that works really well, and everything over that is going to cost a little bit more money even over time after you optimize it. So I kind of equate it to a baseball team, right? So if you just look at the average batting of an entire team, you might have some people on your team that are doing terrible. Then you might have some people who are on your team who are doing superstars. But if you look at it as a whole, you might pay everyone about the same, and someone's going to come steal your key players. So I'm going to break down a little bit how you can look at incremental sales. Now, I call this a quick glance. There are much, much more effective, elaborate, scientific ways of doing this. But I try to back it up to a very basic level to at least tell you directionally if the extra spend is worth it or not. So I'll go through the steps, and then I'll actually show the example. So first step, if you're in AdWords, for example, look at your campaign level report or ad group, depending on how you expand. If you expand by creating a new ad group, you want to look at the ad group level. Most people expand in the campaign.
Right.
So that's probably where you're going to look. And you want to look over conversions over a long enough time frame that you're looking at performance now versus performance when either budgets start ramping up or you start doing a lot of new things in the account. I find that's usually 3 to 6 months, but you're obviously going to know best. If your budget doubled month over month, you only need to look at 2 months. And if it's been a long, slow, gradual incline, you might want to look back up to a full year. You're going to pull the date range that makes sense for you. Then you're going to segment that report by month, which is easy to do in the AdWords interface, and download the report. And then this is where you have to decide if you want to compare last month to the month before, last month to 3 months ago, or maybe even an average. Maybe for the first, in a 6-month time period, first 3 months you were spending at about the same level, and then you got a big increase in budget. The next 3 months you're spending at a new level. You might want to look at averages. So there's no real right answer. It's just making sure you understand what you're trying to compare and what the event is you're kind of trying to track back to when the budget increased.
So yeah, it really is going to be tailored to the individual specifics of your account.
Absolutely. And then you're going to subtract that recent spend over and conversions over that control period, whatever you decide that to be. So we'll jump into an example. It'll be probably a little bit more clear. So this was an actual account, renamed all the campaigns, so you guys can see what that was. And you can see in the very top, I'm comparing October to February. So October was a really, really good month, and then budgets were increased pretty significantly. And February saw a pretty sharp increase in CPA. So we were trying to figure out what was the core happening here and what was actual the CPA effect in the long term for the new spend, and how would that affect things. So you can look at this really quick. The old budget was about 20,000, so we spent 19,500, saw 347 conversions. And then in February, we spent 30,000, so $10,000 increase in budget for 400 conversions at a total CPA of 75. So you can see new CPA 75, old CPA 56. So we're trying to figure out if what was really going on there, what was the story. So I subtracted, I determined the difference between October spend and conversions between February, just subtracting them from each other. And you can see here, for the most part, there's a couple campaigns that really stand out that saw a big increase in spend. Now, knowing the name of the campaigns and knowing that those were expansion campaigns, it was pretty easy to tell, okay, those are ones that were new, that we were trying to do something. So I really wanted to zero in just on those ones. You can see those three here. Collectively spent 11,500, so actually a little more than even the increased budget. So some of that was taken from other campaigns for 92 incremental conversions. So those are conversions more than were generated before at $124 CPA. So if you remember, in October, CPA was 55-ish, and in February it was 75-ish. And so these are significantly more expensive than conversions in October, and even than the average conversions. What this does is forces a really interesting conversation with your boss, the person setting budgets, or an agency or client, because now you have a conversation of, these are conversions that you wouldn't have got without this $11,000 in spend. So are these 92 conversions, even at $124 compared to 55, worth it? Because the others are still keeping the lights on. Performance there actually stayed steady. CPA on those core terms stayed the same. So is this just extra revenue? You might find out that revenue per lead, let's say, or per sale is $200. So even at $100, there is still some money to be made. And as long as this is just extra money I wouldn't have had anyway, it all works out. But you also might find out that anything over $100 you lose money on. So all of these incremental conversions actually we lost money on and aren't worth getting. So more than anything, this forces an interesting conversation about the expansion ideas, what the results were from them, and puts things in perspective of, did everything get worse, or are new things just more expensive than the old conversions we were seeing?
Yeah, I'm going to say, based on what you said with the conversation and some of the numbers that I'm seeing, I'm pretty familiar with the exact account we're talking about right now. So yeah, absolutely. Everything you said is correct. And kind of, figuring out whether or not these more expensive conversions are actually going to be, like, in the long run, useful to your business. That's, it's an interesting conversation, but one that needs to happen, because that's, as the title of the webinar said, that's how you keep your spend under control.
And you remember in this case, they actually said $100 CPL makes sense for them. So the ones that are 160, 150, we had to drastically cut those or just remove them. But the 104, we were pretty close, and that was 56 conversions. So with a little bit of optimizing, we're able to get to the point that it makes sense for them to keep advertising there.
Yeah, but I just wanted to talk, and so you had that baseball metaphor. That's like a Moneyball thing, right?
It's like a Moneyball thing. So the next step is making budget adjustments on the fly. Why I think this is really important is a lot of times with high spend accounts or when budgets are increased a lot, there's a lot of question and concern over, are we spending it in the right way? So if I give you an extra $10,000 or an extra $100,000, how are we going to spend it? And do we expect conversions to come at the same level? And I really see three ways to make sure that the way you approach account structure allow you to do this and communicate with your boss about those types of questions. The three ways are top performer campaigns, campaigns by match type, and campaigns by geo or other factors that see a big difference in performance. Most importantly, whenever you're going to have a situation where you might have to push and pull, maybe because of seasonality, or maybe because of the way budget's set, or maybe because budgets aren't necessarily set, and sometimes it's just pushed, and sometimes it's just pull, which happens. You need to try to find a way to leave the core alone, which is what all three of these things try to do. So in the case of top performer campaigns, these are creating campaigns with their own dedicated budget that have single keyword ad groups that really drive usually 80% of all the conversions in your account. So a lot of times these are brand terms, a lot of times these are really specific, really valuable terms for you. You want to make sure you don't ever touch. You don't actually say, okay, I have to cut budget, so I'm going to cap budget on this campaign.
Right.
And that campaign happens to have your best keywords in it, and so now you stop impressing as often on your top.
So you want to make sure that these top performers have kind of free reign to spend what they can, because it's always going to be good money spent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are your bare bones.
Yeah.
So what's the least we can spend and get 80% of our conversions? The answer is going to be whatever this campaign can spend. And then you move to campaigns by match type. And what this allows you to do, we all know modified broad versus phrase versus exact are going to perform differently. Usually you're going to have different revenue, different return on ad spend, different CPL or CPA. But having campaigns by match type allows you to know, okay, if exact's my best, I can let that run all the time. And then if someone comes and says, okay, I need to increase budget by $100,000, you know you have these campaigns that with the flip of a switch you can turn on. And because they've been turned on before, you know about how much they'll spend and about what their CPA will be. And then that allows you to say, sure, I can spend $100,000 more. This is going to be the impact on the account. Or maybe you can't spend that much. So you say, well, I can spend $50,000 there, and then I can spend $50,000 more in modified broad at an extra additional CPA. And you can have those conversations that help everyone make better decisions to decide if the extra budget's well spent or well worth it. And then campaigns by geo or any other factors. There's a lot of times where maybe you have a physical location, and you know within 30 miles of that physical location, you perform really well. Within 60 miles, you still do okay, but it's half as good as you do within 30 miles. Yeah. Having geo-targeted campaigns, even though you don't have to do that anymore, allows you to actually say, okay, I'm only going to run this core 30 miles within, and then at a time we need to increase budget, or at a time we're running a special promotion and we really want to push sales, we can expand that really easily. And again, because it's something I might have ran before, I'm able to say this will be the impact, or at least what we expect the impact to be, and this is what the CPA will be, and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. We're doing something similar right now in one of my accounts, to kind of speak to a very timely issue, where we've segmented it both by geography, but also by product lines in order to do that exact same level of push and pull with our budgets, because like a lot of this is experimental budgets. Like it's a new product line they haven't had a lot of experience with. So in this case, it kind of falls into that experimental line of campaigns, but because it's segmented out, we're able to control those budgets.
Yep, exactly. So another thing that happens a lot of time if we have a lot of budgets, it's really easy to become Google dependent or Google centric. So we have $100,000 to spend. We can spend $100,000 in Google, so we do. The problem is that raises a lot of flags. For one, are we finding new ways to do it? Are there more cost-effective ways to do it? Are there ones that drive higher return on ad spend or something like that? But also, you're kind of dependent on the swings of Google. If they make a change overnight, you can have a big issue in your account if 100% of your spend is going there. Or if a mistake's made in the account, the same thing. You're not mitigating any risk, because if you make one mistake in an account and 100% of your spend goes to that account, you can make some people's lives very miserable. If you have a bunch of salespeople waiting for phone calls to ring, or people waiting to ship products out the door. So this is just a reminder more than anything. I'm sure everyone listening is familiar with all of these, but that you need to look at Bing, you need to look at Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. You need to look outside just the Google retargeting network to third-party retargeting tools like AdRoll and Retargeter and all of those. And you need to consider doing display buys, again, outside the Google display network. A lot of times, they're not going to be as effective, and that's kind of the harsh reality of it. But it allows you to actually better understand the marketplace. So if you see you're on an upswing, is it just because Google's better, or is it because the marketplace is better? Right. If you're one place, it's hard to determine that. And then mitigates risk. If everything goes down, again, is there an issue in the account? Is something going wrong with Google? Did they change something? Or is there a bigger issue that needs to be addressed?
Yeah, and I think with some of these networks, like Facebook in particular, so you said to understand like your market better, this also helps you understand who your customer actually is a little better too. Because
absolutely.
Facebook is so focused on the interests and the actual person, as opposed to like just a specific keyword target. You can get a better idea of what it is that actually attracts people to the product by their actual interests. And yeah, and in some cases, it just makes good sense for some of these other advertising platforms because the average cost per click is going to be cheaper. Because Google makes, I mean, we all saw this with enhanced campaigns over a year ago where they make just one big sweeping change, and all of a sudden our average cost per click starts creeping upwards and upwards. And between that and the ever increasing competition on that platform, it just makes sense to diversify your advertising dollars.
It's true. It also being too Google dependent allows them to make changes, so it doesn't put enough pressure on them to remain competitive with other networks. Because if they're getting all the money, they don't have to worry about it. But if a lot of dollars shift to Bing, Facebook, Twitter, you have to think twice about doing things without talking to the advertisers about how they really think that it should happen and if it's going to be effective.
Absolutely.
So just a couple questions to ask regarding spend that I think it's important for executives to be asking, but as well as account managers. So one is spend justified as a defensive strategy? So this is, I equate it to, in my speculative mind, the reason why Microsoft is in search. Microsoft's not necessarily in search to make $1 billion a year off Bing. In fact, that's only like 1% of their annual revenue. They're in search to keep Google out of Excel. Right? They don't want Google over there having all the time and all the money in the world to develop a better Excel product than them. So once Google got into Google Docs, Microsoft said, okay, great, we're going to buy a search engine and we're going to make that put some pressure on them. Just like that same thing is for them, is it a defensive strategy for your business to be bidding on your branded terms, to be bidding on trademark terms, to be making sure the low-hanging fruit, the search queries that are going to convert for your competitors, they're not just making easy money on them. Do you need to put money into things, even if it's a little less cost effective, simply to protect your turf and to keep someone from taking you on? Is the current spend level needed in order to maintain current revenue level? So this seems like a really obvious question, but a lot of times it's not asked. If we cut budget by 50%, what would happen to revenue? It's usually not a one-for-one. It's usually not, it will go down by 50%. Might go down by 20%. Might go down by 10%.
Right.
Without asking the question, you don't really know, and without doing the analysis, there might be some cost savings there. On the other side, you might find that reducing it by 10,000 actually significantly reduces your number of conversions and your revenue. Maybe the fact that revenue goes down by as much as it does requires return on ad spend to be higher to actually cover the cost of keeping the lights on, keeping the doors open, and keeping employees employed. So even though the return on ad spend of 100,000 might be okay, at 75,000 actually has to be higher in order for the business to remain profitable. So it's a good question to ask to understand the business and to understand the strategy and what revenue kind of needs to be break even. And then what's the plan for pushing and pulling spend as needed? As we already talked about, this is really important because when someone says I need to spend more money, the answer can't just be, well, we'll try, or here's what we think will happen. There has to be a plan in place, which requires really, really good account structure.
Yeah, absolutely. And more than anything, the one thing to emphasize is that spend is usually a red flag when you don't know what it's actually providing for your business. If you're just spending money for the sake of spending money and not having a plan behind it, not knowing where it's going, what it's actually getting you, that's usually a pretty big problem.
Absolutely.
So
I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Eric in his adorable plaid shirt.
We're both wearing plaid, just for the record. So yeah, this is an important point, is to project the actual impact of your spend. So are these new campaigns or existing campaigns? This speaks to the issue that Jeff talked about earlier. Are these core campaigns, or are they going to be experimental? Which campaigns and engines are going to see an increase? And then what are the projected gains based on your campaign metrics? And this is especially important for if you're just doing expansion with existing campaigns. This can be derived entirely from your existing impression share percentage, specifically loss due to budget.
So I'm going to give you fair warning. Eric's about to get really nerdy and have a lot more case studies. So you might want to be looking at your screen.
I actually have like 5 case studies. So Jeff is the touchy-feely portion of this. I am the hard data. So we'll dive right in. So this is a case study number 1 where we just grew existing campaigns. So our monthly budget was just $7,500, just only spent in Google. And the current account ceiling is actually closer to $16,500. And this is as determined by impression share loss due to budget. So we got to ask the question, so what would how would our leads break down, since this is the goal in this case? What would our leads break down to as we increase our spend gradually? So we kind of figured this out through the following method. This is just using our existing campaign metrics. categories. Nothing flashy, nothing super crazy. So we have 3 campaigns in which we can spend. So campaign 1 has an additional $6,600 in spend at $19.01. Campaign 2 has an additional $1,500, and campaign 3 has an additional $1,200 to spend. And each are at different cost per lead metrics. So clearly, as we increase our spend, there's a pretty clear path forward if we're just worried about purely lead volume, which in this case, that was their primary concern. So as we increase spend, this is how it breaks down as we gradually increase our budget. So if we increase it by 2,000, we go from our current rate of 381 up to 486 because we're just investing in that one campaign that had the much more efficient spend. And it's that same, it's basically a linear progression as we go up to that $6,000 spend. Once we hit that cap, we start shifting spend to the less efficient campaign. So there's a pretty clear point of diminishing returns. So after 13,500, we're starting to invest in those less efficient campaigns, or to only 795 leads, and then only 844 when we cap up at that $16,000. So again, speaking to Jeff's point, it's up to you or your boss to figure out, once we hit that point for diminishing returns, is it worth it to start spending more for these conversions? Does it make sense to your business?
And I would say the emphasis is it's on the account manager to understand this information, because they're the only ones who are going to know it. They're the only ones that are going to be able to look at it and use data that's available to them, like lost impression share due to budget in this case, to be able to determine it and feed it up. So my caution to everyone is, someone says spend an extra 100,000, you don't just spend an extra 100,000. You go through this exercise and figure out the point of diminishing return. Do a graph like this and show the boss what would actually happen if you did that.
Yeah, so basically the takeaway for this is, here there's a clear point of diminishing returns. Sure, you can spend up to $16,500 based on our existing campaigns, but should we? I mean, that's the real question we should ask. Because that really depends on how comfortable you are with the loss and efficiency, and how aggressive you're going to be with that experimental spend. Again, speaking to that core versus experimental breakdown.
And that the answer to the should you is the answer of, this is how the business thinks. As an agency, that's really important to us, because we have to use information like this to decide how to make decisions on behalf of our clients. And if you are in-house, it's important for you, because obviously you want to get the promotion and get the raise and look it in front of the boss. And so if you understand what the business believes, if they think $100 or 100 extra leads is worth it, no matter the cost, that's really telling, versus there's a cutoff and this is the most we want to spend and the most we can't spend.
Absolutely. So all good things to keep in mind as you kind of work at this exercise. So the next thing I want to make a point about is, so you need to plan ahead for your initiatives. So I kind of got cute here with my bullet points here, but you need to have a plan, and then have a backup plan, and then also have a backup plan for your backup plan. And what I mean by that is, so I'm going to kind of show you another case study here. So we hold quarterly business reviews with our clients where we focus on new account initiatives to work on in the following months. And they contain both a mix of optimizations and growth strategies. So I'm just going to share with you the last 3 that we did for this client and some of the takeaways that we had for them, because some of the initiatives worked and some of them didn't. But we did a gradual rollout here in order to basically figure out what works, experiment in a structured fashion, and not just throw everything at the wall to see what sticks all at once. Because if we did that, it probably would have been a bloodbath.
And we're all actually witnessing history here, because Eric admitted that he's not perfect. He said some won and some didn't. So I'm going to make a note of that.
Exactly. So I'll be sure to tell you exactly why they did or did not work here going forward. So this was our action items coming out of Q2 2013. So prior to working with us, the client had no remarketing campaign. So we launched remarketing. That was a pretty easy win. That worked just fine. We also did a Bing launch, which worked well too. We did some international targeting expansion, which didn't really work in the sense that we got some conversions out of it, but not the kind of volume they were looking for. We also did some geographic modifier optimization. So this was right when Google rolled out the bid modifier functionality by geographic location. So we did some min-maxing for our geographic locations, which saw a pretty good return. We also did an account campaign restructure, which led to more efficient budgeting, as Jeff kind of mentioned. So we did essentially a top performer breakdown by product line to allow us to push and pull our budgets more effectively there. And that definitely worked. So once we figured out what worked here, so we cut out the international targeting expansion, kept the rest of it, and moved on to our Q3 2013 action items, which in this case was a remarketing expansion, which worked but also didn't work. So in this case, the reason it didn't work is that our remarketing campaign was already pretty extensive. So the additional stuff we added didn't really help us all that much. It was very small gains at best. The same can also be said for some Facebook remarketing that we tried. This was done via AdRoll. We also did some AdWords for video, making use of the AdWords remarketing functionality that's built into their AdWords for video on YouTube platform. We also finally got around to some landing page tests, which really worked, which really kind of blew the doors off of the account. We also did some product expansion, and one of those worked in that they got leads out of it, and those leads eventually turned into something. But it just a longer sales cycle than they were expecting. But they also launched, so they launched two products. One worked in terms of conversion volume, but they didn't end up selling anything out of it. So it was kind of a mixed bag. And then back-end tracking, where we integrated with both Salesforce and HubSpot, which also kind of helped to understand how their spend was actually performing. So in this case, we got rid of the stuff that didn't work, kind of minimized that, and started to emphasize what absolutely worked in this case. And then in Q4 2013, we got kind of a campaign budget increase to really start working on high growth. So this is actually, I think, ties into the exact case study that Jeff
totally accident.
Yeah. Yeah, by accident, the exact case study that Jeff had mentioned earlier. So we had a big campaign budget increase. We did product expansion, again, where we had great volume of poor quality. We had a display keyword, so contextual keyword campaign test, which had mixed results in that we saw plenty of conversion volume, but it was at a higher CPA than they were expecting. We had a similar users campaign test. We also had a Google beta test, which worked but was also low volume, and then unpausing some high CPA keywords, which did not work. Again, which some of those results you can see illustrated by Jeff's point earlier. So in this case, we cut what didn't work here, kept what worked, and now we're also currently in the process of basically reevaluating some of that as we go forward based on its long-term impact on the CPA. And then our Plan 2014 initiative is talking about things like LinkedIn and then dedicated Facebook PPC, not just Facebook remarketing. Also doing a little bit of talk about international PPC and Baidu, and then investment in CRO, and then some other stuff like affinity audiences and other display beta tests. And the point here isn't that you should try all these things. It's that you should try all these things, but do it in a structured, planned way and have an idea going forward. So in Q2 2013, these things didn't work. So if none of them worked, that's okay because we still have a slate of things coming up to try.
Yeah, it kind of gets back to, are you risk adverse? Are you looking for growth or not? And how to time these? Because like you said, of course you can do everything at once, but are you taking money away from things that work really well in order to experiment, or are you being too conservative? And in this case, I think 4 or 5 initiatives is pretty good for a short period of time. But it really does depend on the client, what they're looking to do, or the boss of the company, what they're trying to do.
Absolutely. So keep that in mind as you look to grow or restructure your accounts. Just look at the initiative and plan them out. I mean, I'm a big fan of to-do lists, and this is just kind of one much longer scope to-do list. So keep these kinds of things in mind as you look to grow and manage your accounts. So to kind of speak to the other point of this, so it's not just about growth. I mean, account growth is fantastic. Jeff will be the first one to admit that I love to grow accounts. Like I'm a pro at it. But before you commit more resources, you should figure out how well you're actually spending your existing budget. So how can you find out? So this is one of my favorite tricks, and I've spoken about this on the blog a little bit, and I also spoke about it at conferences. So there's a really neat trick here with Excel Solver, in that you can download a share of voice report from the Bing Report Center and an impression share report from AdWords, and then by throwing those two reports together, you can use Excel Solver to determine your optimal campaign budget. So if you have a budget-capped account, a budget-capped campaign, this will tell you whether or not you're being as efficient as possible in allocating the money you actually have. So if you aren't actually getting the most out of your existing budget, why should you spend more, or should you even spend more? So that's a question you should be asking yourself as you run this kind of analysis on your account. So I've listed where you can actually find this source. So the source comes from British Sam Owen off of his PPC Hero post, How to Use Excel Solver to Optimize Your Campaign Budgets. And I've listed the URL down there. And this is how it looked. This is also for pretty much that. We keep going back to the same client here. This is the exact same one we used for them when we kind of figured out our optimal budget allocation across both Google and Bing. So here we have a mix of both Google and Bing campaigns. And we have their average daily spend across all of their campaigns in both accounts. We also reverse engineer their maximum possible spend on a daily basis, making use of their lost impression share due to budget metrics, and then using Excel Solver, so we set a cap on what we're willing to spend on a daily basis, and let Excel Solver figure out what they should actually be spending in order to maximize the amount of conversions they should be getting. And the optimal budget, as found by Excel Solver, told us, so you can see there in that about in the middle, so we have that average daily spend campaign only spending about $30 a day. It has a cap of $111, and based on its conversion metrics, we should actually be maxing out our spend there instead of capping it the way it had been, which makes sense. I think in that case, that was like a brand campaign, so it was low-hanging fruit to just shift our budget around. But in this case, we were averaging about 5.29 conversions a day. With Solver, it was saying we could get up to 6.3 conversions a day. So a whole extra conversion per day, 30 extra conversions per month, just by more efficiently allocating our spend. So we're changing nothing except the daily budget amount.
Yeah, this is a really cool tool. I mean, you increase conversions by 20% in what takes maybe a half an hour to do in terms of doing it through Solver, and then just changing some budgets.
Yeah, and it absolutely worked. Just shifting a little bit of budget to Bing and shifting our budget around some Google campaigns made it so basically things were just that much more efficient. So it dropped their CPA from about $80 to about that $55 range that Jeff talked about in his initial case study. So give this a shot. So the wrinkle here is that you're adding in the Bing lost impression share metrics, but you can find that in the report center. It's the same way. It's calculated the same way as Google. So definitely give that a shot. It's a really super neat trick. And then the next thing to understand, so again, we're kind of speaking to the point throughout all this that if you don't know how your spend is actually providing you any profit, return on investment, it doesn't matter if you're lead generation or e-commerce. Knowing the ROI of your increased spend, you need to know that, or really just your spend in general, not even just increased spend. So going beyond your raw conversion volume, your CPA, knowing the actual profit behind each campaign allows you to make better informed decisions about your money.
Which sometimes we give up on, right? Because it's hard.
Yeah.
If it's e-commerce, it's not that hard always, but if it's lead generation, a lot of times it is. It's understanding how many of the leads actually turn into good prospects and how many good prospects actually turn into clients, and what the average lifetime value of the client is. So there's actually, it's hard, and a lot of people end up hitting the road, especially on lead gen, but incredibly important because you might be underpaying significantly or overpaying significantly if it's just a CPL goal.
Yeah, and a lot of this is going to be, so here we make use of a lot of pivot tables for this, as well as a lot of URL tags and backend tracking to make sure we get this kind of data. But it's important to just know these metrics because you might be pausing a keyword or a campaign that, while it has a higher cost per conversion, is actually providing you a great return on investment. So without knowing this kind of data, you're basically flying blind. So this is an example of a return on ad spend report. This is actually one of the ones I'm finishing up today. So we have all of our cost metrics and our conversions and our cost per conversion and our closed leads and their closing rates. But it's important to know, so as we kind of shift our budgets around, to know the actual return on ad spend of these campaigns, because you can see here in the middle, we have a smattering of campaigns that are at, a $3 return on ad spend, a $6 return on ad spend, or a $2 return on ad spend. A lot of those are ones we invest a lot of money in, but they're still capped by budget. So knowing how they actually perform, when you get the call to either increase or reduce budgets, knowing which of these campaigns that money should be coming from based on what these return on ad spend metrics tell us allows us to maximize the return on investment for these campaigns. And it's important to do that because otherwise you could be making the wrong call and taking away money from a campaign that actually provides you more money in the long run.
Absolutely.
So this was just pulled with, so I think there's some Salesforce data and some pivot tables, so it's not super complicated to actually do. It's just time consuming, but it's definitely very insightful into how we manage these accounts and how we grow these accounts too.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the high end, these ones with return on ad spend of almost $90 for every dollar invested. I mean, I can guarantee that's a brand, is my
That's
guess.
a core campaign, yeah.
But as you go down, even those really high ones, you might be managing to the exact same cost per conversion goal. But if you can get 10 times the actual revenue than you can from other campaigns, maybe for that one campaign, your CPL target should actually be higher. Maybe not 10 times higher, but maybe a little bit higher, because you're just being too conservative with that particular campaign because you're managing to the aggregate CPL instead of return on ad spend.
Yeah, and I think the way to kind of show you this in a perfect example is the campaign. So the cost was $18,813, 585 conversions at a cost per conversion of $32. But we have another campaign that's just directly below that that spent $24,000, provided nearly, or actually no, it provided twice the conversion volume. But in terms of raw profit, the campaign that has the higher cost per conversion blew it away.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's just making sure you're as informed as you can be about how your spend is actually performing for you. And this is just a really good way to illustrate that. But the other thing you can do is, so we've already discussed how to best judge your current spend and your potential spend by direct results, so either conversions or actual profit. But there are other ways you can gauge the success or lack thereof of your newly budgeted spend. So in this case, this is just a really easy report you can put together with the search funnels functionality that they've just put into the AdWords interface. So this is in tools and conversions, it's search funnels. So this is a report, it's from the same account as before, where it talks about the generic campaigns and the brand campaigns. So it's not a surprise, but these generic campaigns have a measurable impact beyond just their direct conversion metrics. So pausing them or reducing their spend would actually indirectly harm our performance elsewhere. So the top campaign is a competitor campaign. It has a pretty high cost per conversion, but in terms of how much it assists in conversions elsewhere, it's impression-assisted conversions, it's actually a much more generous campaign than we see from the branded campaign. So that branded campaign that had an $89 return on ad spend, it doesn't assist in many conversions at all. And that generic campaign, that was also that one, that generic campaign 10, that was that same campaign that had the $2 return on ad spend. So it's also a pretty greedy campaign in that it spends a lot, doesn't really assist in many other conversions. It kind of closes conversions. It doesn't bring doesn't bring conversions to other campaigns.
I also like that you've resorted to name calling and calling it a greedy campaign.
It is. It's so greedy. It's a selfish campaign. Never calls its parents. Its parent campaigns. We're getting kind of weird here. I apologize.
I don't.
But understand that there are other metrics in place that you can judge the success of these campaigns by than just their direct returns. You can see we've called it the halo effect, or just search funnels or assisted conversions. Just take a look at how these other campaigns are contributing to the overall picture.
Very cool. So we'll move to our next live poll, or I guess we're wrapping up here. So one of our last live poll questions. So if you've kind of steered away from your screen, look back at it and answer the question for us if you would, which is, what is your biggest concern with an increased budget? Is it A, lack of communication, B, poor follow-up on the results of that increased spend, C, spending without a plan in place, or D, with low return ad spend? And I was thinking as you were finishing up that last slide, Eric, a big theme of today has been there's no right answer. There's no necessarily right way to do it. You might do it by return on ad spend. You might do things by CPL. Yeah. You might have something existing that works really well. You might have something new that works better. There might be Solver as a tool to do it, or there might be another way to do it. I think the thing I've taken away from the most is you really have to take time, as I try to encourage Eric to do, and sometimes I succeed at, and other times I don't, to actually think through and understand the best way to do it for your business and what their goals are. So going to the poll question, it looks like 36% of respondents says poor follow-up on the results of that increased spend, and then spending without a plan in place, which are two of the biggest things we talked about, right? Yeah. Plan in place, knowing how you're going to spend it, what the results will be. And then the follow-up is exactly what I see a lot of time. The new stuff gets lumped in with, the new stuff gets lumped in with the old, and it's all reported on aggregate, and we just go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it seems like, a lot of, and even mix of some interesting points in there, people with a lot of pain points about this. So yeah, hopefully you'll be able to get some insight from what we talked about today.
And I think we have one more?
Yeah, so we have one more, so we're just gonna leave this open for a while. So yeah, so if you need help, would you like help with your PPC accounts and management? And if you are, we have a couple of options there. So some of them free. So PPC management. So we handle the day-to-day management of your PPC account. There's also a PPC audit where we review your account for optimizations. There's a PPC retainer where we handle only specific needs within your account. So I can speak to this directly as I've done quite a few where we do things like massive keyword build-outs and account restructures. We just finished one where we restructured like over 1 million keywords and then built out destination URLs for each keyword. That was fun. And then we also have our free solutions blueprint where we take a look at your account and just provide free analysis and consultation. This is for accounts with 20,000 or more in ad spend.
Yep, absolutely. So while you guys are all answering that, we got a handful of questions. So we have 10 or 15 minutes here where we'll go through and answer the ones we can. So while I'm looking through all the questions, Eric, I had one for you. So we talked a lot about core campaigns versus experiment and how you have to give some things time and then you figure out if it works or not. But how do you know if it's enough time? Is something considered core after 3 months or 30 days?
Well, in terms of whether or not like you have enough time, I would take a look at just statistical significance. So there's a lot of ways you can look at. I think it's like the Teasley test is the main one. I think we have a statistical significance. I'm stuttering a little bit. I always stutter when it comes to that word, though. Statistical significant calculator of our own. Ways you can just basically figure out, like, do I have enough data here to make an educated decision about this spend? And then in terms of how long it takes, I think it's really contingent on the actual account. Like if you have the volume to say like after 3 months you can make that determination, or even after a month you're going to be able to know. You can make a determination that quickly. But if it's a smaller account, like I've managed some of the past that have only spent roughly $500, $600 a month, it takes a lot longer to figure out whether or not something's actually turned into a core campaign or if it's experimental.
So thanks for that very eloquent answer. That follows on a question we got, which is if we're setting a difference between a core and experimental budget or something like that, how much is enough total budget to actually do that? So if your budget's only $1,000 a month, can you actually have a dedicated experiment budget, or is there a point where it's just ineffective to do so?
Well, what is the average cost per click of that particular industry? Or maybe even the terms you're talking about, because it might take more than you're anticipating. So to actually make a valid experiment, to get the number of clicks you need, your average cost per click is probably going to dictate a lot of that. You know what I mean?
Yep, I think that's very fair. I think it goes back to there's no right answer. And if you have $1,000 budget, so you can spend $100 on an experimental, you might be better going into a network like Twitter or Facebook or something where clicks might be less expensive.
Yeah, exactly.
Versus just trying to compete in a more expensive place. So we got a question on the incremental glance slide that I put together. So whether or not you create specific test campaigns and ad groups to be able to come back later and measure incremental spend. I like to not create new things within existing campaigns, but what are your thoughts, Eric?
I think anything you can do to make it easier to understand the results of what you're trying to test will make it, in the long run, it'll be more effective both in terms of measuring it and managing to it. Because if you lump a lot of experimental stuff in, like that's the reason why we call it like experimental versus core campaign. So you can actually break that down, break down the spend, break down the metrics, make sure you like segmenting it out is a fantastic idea if it were me.
So we talked a lot about doing things with spend that has already happened before. So cutting stuff that didn't work, adding stuff back that did work, or that kind of things. But how do you know, like with your quarterly reviews, if something will work or not, right? If it's an entirely new initiative, but you're expected to put some kind of performance expectation into it, how do you decide, or how do you think through how to do that?
A lot of it's just going to be taking a look at the existing account metrics, and I mean, it is an estimation. There's no doubt about it. So just taking a look and really making your best guess about what kind of audience might be available, using some of the Google tools like the keyword planner, or even in some cases, is the Wonder Wheel still a thing? Is the display planner still out there? Because I think they might have that as a potential way for you to gauge the impact of your display campaigns. But just look at some of the like analogous campaigns in your account. So if you have a remarketing campaign, you can at least take a look at the click-through rate. It's going to be lower if it's a general display campaign, a couple of points lower. The conversion rate's probably going to be a little bit lower too. Just use the existing account metrics and kind of what you know about some of the campaigns you're going to be trying to implement and make an estimation.
Makes sense. Very cool. Well, that's kind of the extent of the questions we have. So I think we're pretty much done for the day. We will post a recording of this on the website. So if you had to cut in and out, you can check back tomorrow on PPC Hero. And we should have that. And I'm sure Eric will love to answer your questions. If you have any we didn't get to, you can use the ThinkPPC hashtag on Twitter. And we'll check that for the next bit here and make sure we answer any questions.
Absolutely. And you can reach me on Twitter at JeffAllenUT. No, I'm on Twitter at eCouch11 again. So that we come to the end of our Q&A, which incidentally is also the end of our webinar. So if you have more questions, you can just reach out to us with the hashtag ThinkPPC, either at JeffAllenUT or at eCouch11. You can get a free solutions blueprint from Hanapin Marketing for accounts greater than $20,000 a month in ad spend at the URL listed below. So that's hanapinmarketing.com/solutions blueprint sign up, or you can contact us directly with some webinar feedback at Hanapin Marketing or at marketing@hanapinmarketing.com. And I'm sure they'd love to hear from you too. Take all kinds of suggestions and good stuff there.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you guys joining in, and I'm sure you guys will all be around next week as well.
Absolutely. So until the next time, thanks very much for attending, and have a great day.